Main event of the evening.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing Season 8, Episode 16, Fonzie Gets Shot.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Fonzie Gets Shot.
We open with Fonzie being rolled stomach down into a hospital in rural Wisconsin, having been shot in the butt.
Another hunting accident, I guess.
I promise you, lift me off this table, I will pulverize him.
As the doctor looks him over, in comes the sheriff to take his statement. Potsie, Chachi, and Roger come in, and Fonzie immediately fingers Potsie as the person who shot him.
This is the guy. I want him tarred, feathered, and put in jail.
As Potsie tries to apologize, and Fonzie raves about tarring and feathering and sending him up the river, the sheriff asks Roger to tell him what happened. A few days ago in Milwaukee, Roger tried to convince Fonzie to join him and Potsie at Potsie's father's cabin for the weekend.
It'll be so enjoyable. The cabin sleeps for you, me, Potsie, and we'll find somebody else.
Hold it.
Fonzie didn't want to, on account of not wanting to spend time with Potsie and having to look after Chachi as he studied for college exams. Unfortunately, Chachi seemed more interested in necking with Joni than in studying.
You should be studying here.
I did study.
Yeah, we studied hard.
Yeah.
Howard and Marion returned home from bowling, with Al tagging along until Howard and Marion told him they were going to bed. Joni went upstairs, and Fonzie decided that he would be going to the cabin and also bringing Chachi along to study. Fonzie takes over the story.
Wait a minute. We were not both impossible. I was Mr. Wonderful. This man was obnoxiosity.
When they were at the cabin, Roger was failing to skip rope, as Chachi was more interested in making paper planes than actually studying. Fonzie told all of the birds to fly south, so Chachi wouldn't be distracted by them.
Have a good time flying south. I love you.
But Chachi claimed he could still hear the wind. Roger called Chachi a bad boy, and Fonzie insisted Chachi just needed tender loving care.
What is tender loving care? I don't know either.
Then he got Chachi a glass of water when he demanded it, and didn't react badly when Chachi threw the water at him. He even set Chachi in a rocking chair when he complained about the bench being too hard. A woman named Allison showed up to say she and her girlfriends were having a party, and she immediately begged Fonzie to come to said party and wrap her in his arms and keep her warm.
I love a man that wears leather. If you don't come, my life will have no meaning.
Fonzie turned her down to continue helping Chachi, and Allison ran out in tears. Potsie came in from chopping wood, said he was going hunting, and got his uncle's gun from the closet.
I love guns.
He posed with it, insisting it wasn't loaded, and Chachi declared he's done studying and wanted to go into town for whiskey and loose women.
Cigarettes and whiskey and wild, wild women. They'll drive you crazy, they'll drive you insane.
As Fonzie and Chachi argued, Potsie fired the gun into Fonzie's butt.
Oh, he shot me.
Back in the present, Chachi claims Fonzie's story is hogwash.
Hogwash? Well, we got one of them right here in town. You want to see that mud fly off them hogs?
And tells his perspective of the events. Chachi was studying non-stop for hours, and then Fonzie stormed in after yelling at some birds. He scolded Chachi for taking a break, and then made Chachi say, "Pretty please," for a glass of water.
Say please. Please say pretty please. Pretty please. No.
Roger, annoyed at how Fonzie is treating his cousin, ended up getting the water, and then Fonzie spilt it on himself trying to take it from Chachi. Chachi begged to sit in the comfy rocker instead of the bench.
Get the comfy chair!
And Fonzie allowed this, but only after tying Chachi to the chair. Allison once again showed up to say she and her girlfriends were having a party, and she immediately begged Chachi to come to said party and wrap her in his arms and drive her crazy. Chachi turned her down to study, and she ran out crying. Potsie came in from chopping wood, and went to get his uncle's gun, which he claimed wasn't loaded.
I didn't know the gun was loaded, and I'm so sorry, my friend. I didn't know the gun was loaded, and I'll never, never do it again.
Chachi tried to leave to forage for food, because Fonzie wouldn't let him eat lunch, but Fonzie refused to let him out. As they bickered, Potsie accidentally fired the gun into Fonzie's butt. Back in the present, Roger disagreed with the telling this time, and took over. He was completing his 4,000th rope skip, while Chachi and Fonzie were arguing over Fonzie getting yet another glass of water for Chachi. Roger got it, and scolded them both for arguing so much.
Guys, I came up here to commune with nature, and all I'm doing is communing with your insanity.
Chachi said, "They'll try," and called Roger a saint. He gets up to sit in the rocker. Allison once again showed up to say she and her girlfriends were having a party, and she immediately begs Roger to come to said party.
Walter Wart, won't you come to our party? Walter Wart, won't you come to our party?
Come to our party, Walter.
Roger turns her down to keep Fonzie and Chachi from killing each other, and Allison ran out crying. Potsie came in from chopping wood, tired because the chainsaw wasn't working. Roger suggested that the motor was broken, and Potsie is surprised that it had a motor.
That chainsaw hardly works. Yeah? Maybe the motor's broken. It has a motor?
As Chachi and Fonzie continued to bicker, Potsie brought out his uncle's gun, which he claimed is unloaded. Chachi tried to go for a walk, but Fonzie insisted on going with him. When Potsie tried to defend Chachi, Fonzie dismissed him. What's Potsie gonna do, shoot him in the back? Potsie did not. Rather, he bumped into the fireplace, causing the gun over the mantel to fall and fire right into Fonzie's butt.
Whoa! Shut up. You shouldn't have done that.
Back in the present, the bullet has been removed from Fonzie's butt, and sure enough, it's not from a rifle, but from an old dueling pistol. Roger brandishes said pistol, and the sheriff confiscates it. Potsie demands an apology from Fonzie, and he gets it, sort of.
All right, Potsie, what I'm saying here is what people say when things like this do happen, you know?
Oh, thanks, Fonz. That's all I wanted to hear.
The sheriff and the doctor leave, and Fonzie asks Roger why he didn't just give the sheriff the pistol in the first place. Roger says nobody would let him say anything, and he needed to see the bullet first. And he was kind of enjoying how wrong Fonzie and Chachi's stories were. Did they really think Allison was interested in them? And then Allison does show up to collect Potsie for the party.
Some weekend, you get shot, and Potsie gets the girl.
Fonzie swears Chachi and Roger to secrecy about the events of this weekend.
Thank you, Peter. That was Fonzie Gets Shot. It first aired back on March 3rd, 1981. Happy Days was followed by a new Laverne and Shirley, in which Carmine becomes a stand-up comedian and makes jokes at his friend's expense.
I'll never forget the two guys I went through high school with, Lenny and Squiggy. I swear to God, that was the guy's name, Squiggy. I think his mother named him after a baby pig's tail.
NBC had a new episode of Lobo. This week, the puzzling theft of Perkins's hat puts Lobo, Birdie, and Perkins on the path to cracking a bigger case involving embezzled funds and attempted murder by the impresario of a French Follies review.
That ought to teach you not to spend all your time fooling around at the Folie Bergère.
And CBS had Walter Cronkite's exclusive interview with newly sworn-in President Ronald Reagan.
This afternoon at the White House, we talked for more than an hour with President Reagan.
This is about, from Monday through Friday, about the only outdoors you get is this little walk over here to the Oval Office.
So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
Look, I know I say this a lot, but I'm watching Sheriff Lobo.
I am intrigued by that Lobo plot summary as well. It seems like they just string a bunch of random ideas together and call it a plot, and I have to see how this turns out. Fonzie Gets Shot was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Bob Howard, no relation to Ron. Bob also wrote Dance Contest, The First Thanksgiving, Married Strangers, and Here Comes the Bride Again. Not a bad slate of episodes.
Not at all.
A lot of those are Marion episodes. As for guest stars this week, we have a couple of legends. Let's start with Michael McManus as Titus, the sheriff. Michael is a character actor from Minneapolis who was frequently seen in films and TV shows in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I know him best as Mr. Horning in Kentucky Fried Movie.
Is it not true that you're a driving instructor?
No.
Then it is true.
Yes.
That you're not a driving instructor.
No.
Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning.
Overruled.
Michael's other movies include Poltergeist, Hot Shots Part 2, Smokey and the Bandit, Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol, Mafia, Action Jackson, and Mother Jugs and Speed. On TV, Michael was everywhere. By the time he did Happy Days, he'd already been on Laverne and Shirley twice, plus When Things Were Rotten, Rhoda, MASH, Dallas, Angie, and The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo. After Happy Days, he was a regular on a show called Lewis and Clark, plus he had recurring roles on Baywatch and Webster. He also guested on
Alice, Night Court, Different Strokes, Mr. Belvedere, It's Gary Shandling Show, Married with Children, Doogie Howser, Coach, Dear John, Saved by the Bell, and According to Jim.
He was even Sluggo in Mr. Bill's Real Life Adventures.
How many maggots does it take to eat a rotting carcass?
Potsie, I don't know, 100?
Oh, you heard it.
He was also seen in many TV commercials, particularly for Olympia Beer. So, Peter, what did you think of Michael McManus as our sheriff?
The sheriff is characterized by what I would call aggressive folksiness. They're in a small town in rural Wisconsin for this episode, and what it's characterized by is that both the doctor and the sheriff are fairly unprofessional, and the sheriff at one point mentions that they don't actually have a jail in that town. And the reason why he's the sheriff is because he's the only person who will let people who have been arrested stay in his house. I can't decide if that's a better alternative to the prison industrial complex or not. Despite that, I did kind of enjoy his performance. I found it to be charming.
This is a very stock character, the slightly dim backwoods sheriff, but I think Michael McManus plays it very well. He's obviously a very accomplished comedic character actor. Once you start spotting this guy in movies and TV shows, you'll never stop because he's in so many things. As I was thinking about his character and the way he was portrayed, I started wondering, what if Fonzie Gets Shot had been a backdoor pilot for a show about this sheriff who keeps prisoners in his house?
I think it could have been an interesting exploration into restorative justice.
Our next actor could have been in it as well. We have Sam Edwards as Dr. Abner.
You the doctor?
Some say yes, some say no.
Sam, also known as Buddy, was an actor from Macon, Georgia, who was born into a showbiz family and started performing during his early childhood. An incredibly prolific performer who also worked on radio and the stage. Sam had screen credits from the late 1930s to the mid-1980s. Sam's movies include Bullet, The Postman Always Rings Twice, that's the 1981 remake, Hello Dolly, 12 O'Clock High, The Absent-Minded Professor, and many more. On TV, you may remember him from his recurring role as Bill Anderson on Little House on the Prairie. His other TV credits include numerous appearances on Gangbusters, Dragnet, Wagon Train, The Andy Griffith Show, The Virginian, The Red Skelton Hour, Adam 12, Gunsmoke, The Magical World of Disney, and Barnaby Jones. As a voice actor, his credits include The Flintstones, Johnny Quest, Plastic Man, and Disney's feature film Bambi, where he was the voice of the grown-up Thumper.
Hello, Bambi. Remember me?
Sam died at the age of 89 in 2004. Peter, what did you think of Sam Edwards as our doctor?
He's also characterized by aggressive folksiness, but I did find it kind of funny that he is able to be aware of the sheriff's flaws while not particularly caring about his own. Near the end of the episode, he quips that the sheriff is a good man, but a terrible sheriff. And then after he leaves, Fonzie in turn quips that he's a good man, but a terrible doctor.
Again, this is a very stock comedic character. Both Michael McManus and Sam Edwards play their roles so broadly that it almost felt to me like a backdoor pilot for this wacky small town with a kooky sheriff and a kooky doctor. It's a fun part, and I think Sam Edwards plays it pretty well. Next, we have Michelle Tobin as Allison. Michelle is an actress from Chicago who has been working mostly in TV since the late 1960s. By an amazing coincidence, Michelle was a regular on 3 different shows that were killed by Happy Days: The Fitzpatricks, Grandpa Goes to Washington, and California Fever.
And another one gone, and another one gone, another one bites the dust, hey.
She'd also guest starred on The Wild Wild West, Mayberry RFD, Bonanza, James at 16, Alice, and Marcus Welby MD. After Happy Days, Michelle turned up on TJ Hooker, The Love Boat, Hunter, and The Powers of Matthew Starr. In more recent years, you may have seen her on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Michelle was also one of the kids in the 1968 Lucille Ball, Henry Fonda rom-com, Yours, Mine, and Ours.
Sister's locked in the bathroom.
What sister?
I don't know her name yet. I don't know whether I'm 14, redhead, or what.
Peter, what did you think of Michelle Tobin as Allison?
She basically only is allowed to do one thing, but she does it 3 times in this episode, and she's mostly characterized by being a woman that every man who's telling the story can project themselves onto to make them sound more impressive. Yes, this attractive woman immediately threw herself at me, and when I turned her down, she ran off crying. And at the end, the joke is that she was interested in Potsie the whole time. It is amusing, but at the same time, she is still limited by being kind of an object. I do get the sense that she was kind of having fun with the performance, so I enjoyed her.
A lot of parts that are written on Happy Days for young women are like this Allison character. They're basically there to be lusted after by the guys, or they're there to throw themselves at the guys. Allison, at least we get to see 3 or 4 different variations on this character, so Michelle Tobin gets more to do than the average young actress on Happy Days.
She probably had a better time of things than our last character named Allison.
The actress playing Dr. Abner's nurse is uncredited, even though she has multiple lines, including the first line of the episode.
All right, bring the patient right through here.
Either somebody's agent wasn't getting it done for them, or there was some kind of clerical error, because I thought this actress very definitely should have been in the credits. Did you notice her at all, the actress playing the nurse?
She's the sassy nurse who is amazed and baffled by Fonzie's injury. And honestly, your point about this kind of feeling like a backdoor pilot definitely applies to her. Like, you've got the hick doctor, you've got the hick sheriff, and you've got the hick doctor's brash, more sensible than him nurse.
Had this gone to series, she would have been the voice of reason, which is what you need on your sitcom. So thumbs up to Dr. Abner's nurse. I'm sorry you didn't get credited. I hope at least you got paid. As for songs this week, there were none, but cultural and historical references, we have a few. This episode, or at least its title, was almost certainly a response to the wildly popular Who Shot JR storyline on CBS's nighttime soap Dallas. Larry Hagman's unscrupulous J.R. Ewing character was shot in a March 1980 episode. The killer was revealed 8 months later. The story became a global phenomenon, inspiring headlines and parodies by the dozens.
We are here in Dallas where J.R. Ewing has been shot. Well, J.R., what were you doing that might have caused the shooting?
I'm more familiar with the Simpsons parody, Who Shot Mr. Burns?
Next Sunday, Mr. Burns is shot. And everyone's a suspect.
Fonzie says that Potsie shot him with malice aforefront. He means malice aforethought, the mental element required to prove murder in the first degree in federal law and in some states. Chachi is studying for his college board exam. The College Board is a non-profit organization founded in 1900 to bring order to the college admissions process. It now consists of over 6,000 colleges, universities, and other educational institutions.
With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy.
The College Board is best known for its entrance exam, the SAT. I don't know that the College Board ultimately succeeded in its mission of bringing order to the college admissions process.
College in America, it's a lot of networking and cronyism and bribery.
Howard suggests that Al go to a dance hall.
Well, listen, Al, if you're in the mood for some fun, why don't you go on downtown to the dance hall, huh?
In America, dance halls were the forerunners of nightclubs and discos from the early 1900s to the early 1960s, so they would have been going out of style right as this story was taking place. In the early decades of the 20th century, most all cities and towns had at least one dance hall, usually with live music. They acquired a reputation for scandal and immorality.
Howard, you know what kind of women hang out there?
Note the prominence of a dance hall in the dystopian Pottersville in It's a Wonderful Life, or Groucho Marx's joke about picking up Margaret Dumont in a dance hall in Duck Soup.
Here's one I picked up in a dance hall. Here's another one I picked up in a dance hall.
Some dance halls in large cities even had girls who would dance with patrons for money. These were called taxi dancers. Were you familiar with the dance hall phenomenon?
Not personally, but I am aware of it. I was also aware of taxi dancers because of Sweet Charity, taxi dancers, and actually also did come up in an episode of Laverne and Shirley.
I was probably made aware of it from the movie Popeye because Olive Oyl has that line, it's like a dime a dance, and dime a dance refers to the taxi dancers, who I guess at that time were working for a dime. Very low wages for the taxi dancers, unfortunately.
Yeah, the taxi dancers should have unionized.
I don't think mooey mooey or waka waka was ever a slang term for fooling around anywhere in the world.
Mooey mooey.
You know, Howard, that's just like waka waka.
What did you think of that term, mooey mooey? Do you think that's something that Happy Days made up, or is that a real slang term?
I think it conceivably could be a real slang term, but if it is, it's a very awkward one.
Potsie's uncle's cabin is supposed to be near Woodbine. There is no Woodbine, Wisconsin, but there is a Woodbine Inn in Necedah, Wisconsin, a small village about 166 miles northeast of Milwaukee, so maybe that's where they are. Fonzie says he was ambushed like General Custer at Little Shoehorn.
I was ambushed, like General Custer at Little Shoehorn.
He obviously means Little Bighorn, Montana, the site of an 1876 battle in which General George Armstrong Custer was killed, along with 268 other Americans, by the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho.
Well, everyone knows Custer died at Little Bighorn. What this book presupposes is maybe he didn't.
Custer was not ambushed, but had greatly underestimated the number of enemies he and his soldiers would face. The competing, contrasting flashbacks in this episode are obviously inspired by Akira Kurosawa's 1950 film Rashomon, in which various witnesses describe how a samurai was killed in a forest.
Come on, Homer. Japan will be fun. You like Rashomon?
That's not how I remember it.
Rashomon was the first Japanese-made film to receive a wide release in the United States, and it made a huge impact, apparently, over here, which is why there are so many parodies of it on TV shows.
It's kind of like Fantastic Voyage. Every Saturday morning cartoon had to have an episode where some of the characters got shrunk down to go inside the body of another character.
That's one of those stories that obviously made a huge impression on writers.
And then it just kind of got filtered into mainstream popular culture that way.
Fonzie says that Chachi's paper airplane is a P-51. Chachi says it's a P-38.
What's that, P-51, huh? P-38. I knew it.
The North American Aviation P-51 Mustang was an American long-range single-seat fighter bomber used during World War II and the Korean War. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning was an American single-seated twin-piston engine fighter aircraft that was used during World War II. The P-38 had a very distinctive twin-boom design, causing Japanese soldiers to refer to it as two planes with one pilot. And Roger wears what seems to be a 1980s polo shirt in this episode. The French clothing company Lacoste made polo shirts featuring an embroidered crocodile on the left breast. These shirts were extremely popular in America in the late 1970s and early 1980s and became a signature element of what was called the preppy look.
Gonna get me that t-shirt with the alligator on.
And I would say that Roger embodies the 1980s preppy look through this whole series.
They're not trying very hard to make him look 60s.
They'll get further afield in later episodes.
Yeah, once we get introduced to a certain character who really likes wearing crop tops.
And Roger himself will wear spandex outfits when he's jogging or exercising. So Roger is evidence of the show giving up on the nostalgia angle. Other observations this week. Roger says that no one would listen to him, but he's the first one to give his account of the events. And his flashback goes on for several minutes, including a number of miscellaneous details that the sheriff does not need to hear. Howard and Marion going bowling and Al going to the dance hall. The sheriff doesn't need to know any of this stuff.
Roger is also an unreliable narrator. In his section of the flashback, he also includes Chachi calling him a saint and himself being really good at skipping rope. But I do like the fact that this episode is partially about how Roger thinks that he's better than everyone else, but he doesn't think that he thinks he's better than everyone else.
He is as unreliable in his own way as the others are.
The important thing is that Potsie is not going to go to the sheriff's house, and he's not going to get tarred and feathered.
Nope, he is not going to jail for that. Long before Happy Days, Gary Marshall and Jerry Paris both worked on the Dick Van Dyke Show, which frequently formatted its episodes as flashbacks. I wondered if that was what inspired this episode. That was a way of switching things up with the storytelling on Happy Days, because maybe they were getting a little bored.
That is an excellent point. And now I'm kind of disappointed that Dick Van Dyke never did a Rashomon episode.
Nowadays, I don't think you would have much luck taking a gun into a hospital and then waving it in front of a police officer.
No, you would not.
Roger would be in huge trouble for doing that right now. They would tackle him to the ground. He would definitely have been arrested. The 1980s were such an innocent time in comparison.
Innocent, bone stupid, take your pick.
So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Honestly, nothing really of note, aside from, as you mentioned, Roger's incredibly 80s polo shirt.
So I will ask that age-old, timeless question, was this episode any good?
This episode is delightful, and not just because it gave me an excuse to say Fonzie got shot in the butt a whole bunch of times.
This episode marks a definite break from the usual story structure on Happy Days. I'm sure that the cast and crew enjoyed doing this because this was something different for the characters. When you write a sitcom for 11 seasons, you get bored with your usual sets and locations, and you long to take your characters and put them in some other situation, some other milieu. And that's what we get here. Not only are the characters transplanted to a new situation, but the story is told in a very different way. And I like the way that different parts of the story would change from one telling to another, like how Chachi got from one chair to another chair. Everybody had their own version of how that happened, or how the water got spilled.
It's about the unreliability of human memory and how we're influenced by what other people say without even being fully aware of it. It's very clever.
Yeah, I would say Fonzie Gets Shot is probably one of the stronger episodes of this season. Definitely one to check out. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareurs.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareuspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Well, Joe, this episode featured more Potsie than we are used to, and it basically gave him more to do than he usually does, and that's what we have on the docket for next week, too. It's a Potsie-centric episode with Potsie on his own.
I'm very excited for a Potsie-centric episode, so see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Hey, fellas!
Yeah!
Hey! I want to know!
What?
Tell me! Send it bail, it's left up to me. This what I'll do. I'll throw away the keys in the deep blue sea. Now tell me,
who shot the light?
I don't know now.
Who shot the light?
I say I just don't know. Yeah, yeah.
Who shot the light?
I don't know. I know it was a 44. Oh, how much?
I love guns.